Good morning. I'm Valerie Milano with the Hollywood Times, and I would like Lois Lipman, who's the director, and Tina to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit how they became involved with the film, and then we're going to go through a little time of Q&A. Thank you very much for being with us, ladies. And we're talking about the documentary called First We Bombed New Mexico. It is being screened at the Palm Springs Film Festival. This is a very disturbing film about denial and failure to accept responsibility by those who developed and delivered the atomic bomb to the world, and by a government intent on ignoring its own culpability. The exposure by the Trinity Project of the people of New Mexico is both tragic and an abomination of enormous proportions. This is an absolute kick of the gut. Tina Cordova is such a tireless advocate for justice here and is truly a hero of this tragic story.
And we have, as you said, our hero, Tina Cordova, who's been fighting for 18 years, but it's almost happening now to get Congress to acknowledge and apologize, give compensation and healthcare to these families that have lost everything because of the poisonous exposure. I had a big career living in London. I worked for 60 Minutes and the BBC and traveled around the world, making award-winning films, developing them and field producing them. And then I took a break and moved to New Mexico, which I fell in love with. I have a very strong feeling that I need to use my skill to make a difference. And I had won an Emmy and other awards, but with these other programs. But then I discovered this story in New Mexico that had never been told, and one was bigger than anything I'd ever worked on, which was that the US government detonated Oppenheimer's Trinity Bomb as close as 12 miles from New Mexico residents, most of them Native American and Latina, Hispanic. And they have had generations of cancer. They have never been helped, and they need to be helped. And I also found government documents that had been top secret that explain all of this. The government knew Groves didn't want litigation about what he was doing. The doctors begged him to evacuate residents because he knew the doctors knew this would be catastrophic. So I struggled with how to tell the story. And then I met Tina, and clearly Tina is our engine. And through Tina, we learned this story.
Good morning, Valerie. My name is Tina Cordova, and I'm the co-founder of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. We're an 18-year-old organization that's been working to bring attention to the negative health effects suffered by the people of New Mexico as a result of being overexposed to radiation from the Trinity test. The government said then, continues to say today, that no one lived here and no one was harmed when the bomb was detonated, but nothing could be further from the truth. In 18 years, we've discovered so very many things that tell the true history of how our government looked away from us. They have never come back. They've never done any kind of meaningful study of the impact on us. And I'm the fourth generation in my family to have cancer since 1945. And now I have a 23-year-old niece. She's a beautiful young woman going to college in California in San Jose. She's studying art. She wants to work at Pixar. And she was diagnosed with thyroid cancer a year ago. And that's the cancer that I had. And the first thing they asked me when I was diagnosed was, when were you exposed to radiation? And so I come from a multi-generational family of cancer patients. I wish I could say we were unique. We're not. We've documented hundreds of families just like mine that are displaying 4 and 5 generations of cancer here. It's a true travesty that our government has looked away from us. We're hardworking, tax-paying American citizens that have literally given everything we have to this. And so we're happy to be here today to talk about this beautiful film that Lois produced, which is the absolute counter narrative to the Oppenheimer film that everybody is fully aware of. And we're just hoping that people will see first we bombed New Mexico, and they'll understand that there is a part two, and part two is the complete tragedy of what happens after people live far too close to a nuclear test site. So thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for taking the time. The words, "we thought we got away with it," says a lot about the state of mind of the government. This is a government cover-up of monumental proportions, bigger than Watergate, bigger than arms for Iran, the Tuskegee experiments, and all of the cover-ups, all the cover-ups since that combined. Why does that spirit of denial still exist among those in our government when it comes to the harm that it inflicted on its own citizens? Can you talk about that?
Well, I can tell you what I believe to be true. I believe it's very difficult for our government and the people in our government to admit that in the process of developing a nuclear device and using it to stop the war, which is what they said the goal was, I believe that they have a very difficult time admitting that they harmed American citizens, that they killed American babies, because American babies died afterwards. I think that's a very difficult thing to admit to. But that is the truth, and that is what happened. And the only way that we will ever get past this history is if we finally admit what took place, fully admit what took place, acknowledge the harm that was done, and atone for that harm. And so I believe that that's the reason why. Imagine how horrible it was what took place in Japan. To admit now also that in advance of that, you also bombed American citizens, I think that's a real harsh reality for our government to admit to.
Is it purely a fiscal denial? Do you think that the cost is too great to acknowledge the criminality of the government?
What's really odd right now, Valerie, is they're not even denying any longer that they harmed us. And the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act is an admission of harm that was done to American citizens during the buildup and the nuclear arms race. That's an admission in itself. They're not even denying that any longer. What they're saying is, and this makes it even more immoral, actually. What they're saying is, we don't want to put resources towards taking care of this mess. I keep saying that we live in a democracy based on rules, law and order, and you and I couldn't go about recklessly harming people because it was reckless what they did here. It was entirely reckless. We can't go about harming people, and then when we're held to account for it, simply say, we're not going to put our resources towards taking care of the mess we made. We would never get away with that. That makes this shockingly immoral, actually. And that's where we're at today. The members of Congress say it's going to cost too much to do this. Imagine the insult to our injury that adds. It's just immoral. And it makes, you're asking these difficult questions. And the answer is it's worse than you even think, because when they simply say we don't have the resources, they're lying to begin with, because we do have the resources. I think it was Senator Hawley that pointed out on the Senate floor this year, we're going to give the Pentagon $32 billion more than they asked for in the NDAA, but we won't take care of American children that are dying. It's just immoral.
In addition to that, the state of New Mexico has a really unique position that really isn't talked about. It is the heartbeat of the nuclear arms industry. It's where the uranium was mined. It's where the nuclear bombs were developed. It's where they were made. It's where it was detonated. And now they're going to expand. It's called modernize. They're putting billions into modernizing this same bomb. And it doesn't, there are a lot of interests involved with this billion-dollar nuclear industry, and it doesn't serve their interests to expose the harm that also comes out of this industry. And I love a quote that an expert that we use in our film, MIT professor Kate Brown, says, it's a bit like having the fox guard the hen house. You know, when you have, I don't know, the National Cancer Institute and other institutes that are connected to the US government adjudicating over how dangerous this bomb was, you do not have an impartial judge. And the true story just simply hasn't come out, except for the film.
And I know I'm asking a lot of difficult questions. So if you gals can't answer them, just tell me, because I just have a lot of questions, and I know a lot of our audience will as well. I mean, it seems there was a groundswell of activism for Utah, Arizona, and Nevada in the 70s, but seemingly nothing for New Mexico. Why has it taken so long for these truths about New Mexico to come out?
Well, Lois described very well why there's been, this hesitancy. A lot of New Mexico is home to 2 of the national nuclear labs, along with a variety of other federal installations. We're the only place where we store nuclear waste. We're under consideration right now, and we store low-level nuclear waste at the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, but we're under consideration right now for a high-level nuclear waste facility. We have the cradle-to-grave process taking place here. There's a lot of employment associated with that. There's a lot of industry associated with that. There's a lot of big business associated with that. And so many people believe you just don't bite the hand that feeds you. You just don't discuss the hard truths about what that means. And, until we started shaping a narrative 18 years ago and started reinforcing to people that the reason they have health issues is because of this industry, people seriously didn't talk about it. I mean, at one of the very first town hall meetings we ever held, a woman told me, you're not going to be satisfied till they close down the Air Force Base and this and that. And I said, that'll never happen. And we cannot let that shape how we actually deal with the negative health consequences we're all seeing in our families. And so there's that. I think there's a lot of pushback associated with that. And so that's a very strong disincentive for people to come forward and have these discussions, but not anymore. I mean, there was a time when we would beg the local press to cover what we do. Now they call me on a regular basis for comment. There was a front page article in the Albuquerque Journal when the NDA passed, and it didn't include the RICA amendments. And it basically said, all this money is going to come to New Mexico, but nothing for the downwinders. And so we have helped to bring people forward without fear or constraint any longer to discuss the hard truth about what this nuclear industry has meant for New Mexico.
Yeah, it seems like more consideration was given to the direct victims of our nuclear attack on Japan than there was for the people of our own country who were harmed by this tragic process. Was there never any consideration given to effects these tests had on the actual area in which these tests were held and the people who lived there?
They didn't want that information to come out. It did not serve the nuclear interests of the US government. And in fact, an interview that we worked closely with, Dr. Arlene Brown, who was the most active physician in New Mexico. In other words, in southern New Mexico, she actively traveled all over southern New Mexico, caring for families over 38 years, when most doctors, especially in the early days, would have an obligation to be a doctor for 2 years to pay off their debts, and then they'd leave New Mexico. New Mexico is very underserved by doctors. Dr. Arlene Brown grew up in Los Alamos, which is where the bomb was developed, and her father worked on the bomb. He was a physicist, and he was sent after the bombing of Japan to Japan, and he saw the impact of radiation there. And he came back and he spoke with the designers of the bomb, the top people, and he said, you need to look at the radiation impact on our New Mexican residents. It's devastating. You need to study it. And they said, we've got it covered. Don't get involved.
Yeah, the delay in New Mexico's statehood seems like colonial racism. And there seems to be an attitude of the expandability of human life in New Mexico. Is that an accurate assessment?
That's a very accurate assessment.
Isn't that attitude still prevalent in the treatment of this area of our country?
I believe so. And, Valerie, one of the things I say a lot these days is that in 1945, our government depended on us to be uneducated, unsophisticated, and unable to stand up for ourselves. They knew that we wouldn't have the means for addressing this. And, we were hardworking people that were spending all of our time in 1945 just trying to figure out how to feed ourselves and keep ourselves, above water, basically. And yeah, they have looked away ever since. And it's a horrendous history because we also have the uranium miners who are primarily, a lot of them are either Native American or Hispanic, and they used their poverty to get them to go into these mines without adequate protective gear, and they're dying. And what's horrendous about that history is that if you're Native American, Indian Health Service doesn't even provide cancer treatment. And to give you an idea of what the thinking was in 1945, General Groves, when he was finally encouraged to set up an evacuation of Carrizozo, which is about 35 miles away the crows fly from the Trinity test site, we had active rail systems already through all these little towns, Carrizozo, San Antonio, Socorro, Tularosa. Instead of setting up some rail cars, he had them deliver some cattle trucks. This is at a time in July when the temperatures will exceed 100 degrees daily. We don't move cows in summer because it's inhumane. And I guess they were going to herd us into cattle trucks and drive us off on dirt roads because the roads were dirt roads to where, who knows. I always think of my friend Bernice Gutierrez, who was 8 days old in Carrizozo, and I think of her mom wrapping her in a blanket and being herded into a cattle truck where they can't even sit down, where breathing would have been difficult, and they drive them away. That gives you an idea of how little lack of concern they had for human health and how little lack of concern they had for us. And I believe there's a level of environmental racism absolutely associated with this.
I have a funny feeling I know the answer to this question, but I just want our audience to hear it. The delay in, let me try to put it this way. There were so many signs of the fallout from the Trinity tests that were blatantly ignored by the government, and so much evidence to show criminality on behalf of the government. Has the government moved toward accepting responsibility yet? If so, what is being done? And if not, why not?
Government has made no effort whatsoever to accept responsibility for any part of this. None, zero. They've never come back and done an epidemiological study. They've never set up a clinic where we can be screened. They've never given us one dime towards the exceedingly high cost of a cancer treatment. They've done absolutely nothing. They've done nothing to address this. They continue to run away from their responsibility, even knowing full well the scope of this today. There are very few people today who will challenge the idea that we were negatively affected, and yet they still refuse to accept responsibility for the harm that was done. And it's not going to leave. Our genetics now have been changed forever. In the little village where I grew up, I know of 2 families with children a town of about 3,000 people. One family is from Mescalero, the reservation. They have an 11-month-old little baby, a little boy who's been on chemo since he was 2 months old. They have to take him to MD Anderson Hospital in Houston for those treatments because there's no treatment for him here. Horrendous. Then I know another family with a 2-year-old little girl who has already had one of her eyes taken because of eye cancer, and her other eye is at risk. And we hold bake sales and garage sales and enchilada dinners so that we can raise enough money to make sure that these children have the care that they need. And that is unconscionable. I am so sick and tired of telling this story to the deaf ears of Congress. I am so sick and tired of having to tell people all around me to apologize to them that we still haven't gotten this done. And that is the legacy, that is the Oppenheimer legacy in New Mexico. The hard truth of this is that's the Oppenheimer legacy in New Mexico.
And I have two things to mention. Thank you, Tina. Despite the government's opposition, doing everything to minimize and lie and avoid the hard truths about all of this and cover it up, we did recently have overwhelming support in the Senate to get legislation passed, and we need to. There's some. The House leadership people need to put pressure on them to join forces so that RECA gets extended and includes New Mexico and the native uranium miners before it expires on June 7th. But to backtrack just a moment, you were saying, does the government, come clean? Does it support this at all? Well, I got hold of a top secret document that the former NCI National Cancer Institute top scientist gave to one of the New Mexico legislators in 2008. He said, here's the extent of radiation exposure in New Mexico. And I have this document that he wrote to Senator Bingaman saying, 19 counties in New Mexico were heavily radiated. But then in just a few years ago, the NCI took on what the government stands behind as the ultimate study. It was botched science, it was bad science, and it distorted everything. And it said that the radiation from Trinity only touched 2 of the very least populated counties in the state of New Mexico, impacting almost no one. It said that there was no nuclear radiation in the town that Tina came from, where I've been there, everybody is impacted, and it goes on for generations. So it's very, very hard for this courageous community to fight the US government, but they have lied and misrepresented and stood behind bad science to try to have the last word. But again, we just need a few more Congress people to come on board to get RECA extended, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
People still live in these places, and one has to wonder how safe that is. Are these folks still at risk, and is anything being done to help them achieve environmental and social justice? Do you think these two objectives ever, will be achieved?
So there's no abating what's taken place here. There's no way to recapture the radioactive isotopes that were released at Trinity. There's no way to recapture the sacred lands of the Navajo people and the Laguna and Acoma people. There's no way to recapture their sacred lands after they extracted 32 million tons of uranium from those lands. It's a landscape that will be forever relegated to a nuclear wasteland. And that's the hard truths. We will never, New Mexico is a beautiful state with lots of natural resources. We have everything from, high deserts to pristine alpine forests here. And we're a beautiful, rich state that has literally been heavily impacted by this industry, and it'll never be reclaimed. But I do believe, and I agree with Lois, we are so close to actually achieving our goal, because more and more members of Congress see this for what it is. We've got to get the Republican leadership in Congress to acknowledge that the government is responsible. It's criminal. You've mentioned that several times, Valerie. It's criminal. The government is responsible for what's happened here. And if they can't come back and reclaim, abate the mess that they've made, at the very least, what they can do is take care of our health now that we're dealing with the health consequences associated with that. That's at the very least. Two things that everyone should know about New Mexico that are tied directly to this issue. We're the state most reliant on Medicaid of any state in the union. Why? Because we're a sick and dying population. And when we're sick and dying, we can't work any longer. And we have to have some kind of safety net. Medicaid isn't adequate for somebody with a serious medical problem. Number one. Number two, New Mexico is one of the states carrying the highest medical debt in the country. There's about 2 million people living here. We're carrying close to $1 billion in medical debt. Imagine that. We are saddled with this. Our children and our grandchildren are saddled with this. It's one of the reasons that we see the level of poverty that we do here. We have got to get the federal government on board for taking care of this issue, because this happened through no fault of our own. We did nothing except simply live in the same place for, I always say, hundreds, if not thousands of years. We've occupied this land. These are our homelands, and everything has been taken from us, because I can clearly tell you that without your health, you have nothing. And I have witnessed far too many people die to not fully understand that that is indeed true. Without your health, you have nothing.
Tina and Lois, so many more questions that could be asked, but we would be here for hours. Bottom line can be found in the song that plays over the closing credits. It ain't over till we win. First, We Bomb New Mexico will have its West Coast premiere at the Palm Springs International Film Festival on January 8th, 2024. I want our readers and our viewers to know that's what's happening. How can they reach you both or the film, the website? Please talk about that before we close.
Well, my website is the name is easy to know. It's the name of our film. And thank you for mentioning that it's going to be Monday. That's the premiere. Tuesday and Wednesday. We're so honored and so thrilled. And our website is firstwebombnewmexico.com, or my name is Lois Lipman. I'm happy to hear from anybody. loislipman@gmail.com.
And Valerie, the Downwinders organization has a very thorough website. It's trinitydownwinders.com, trinitydownwinders.com. What we need more than anything right now is for people on the West Coast to join us in Palm Springs, get a feel for what this tragedy has been like for us. And I always say that if you know this history and you remain complacent, then you're complicit in the injustice of it all. Join with us. Lois needs funds to continue getting the film into film festivals. We're headed to other places. We're going to continue to tell this history. We're going to continue to pressure Congress, and everybody has a role in that. Everybody has a member of Congress they can reach out to, and that is what we need right now. And we want to thank you so much for your time, Valerie. It's obvious that you've been affected by this history, and we appreciate your support and your time.
Yes, and thank you, ladies, so much. And we are the Hollywood Times. Today is our website, and our YouTube channel is the Hollywood Times Official. And keep going, and we'll be fighting with you. Okay.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thanks so much. And safe travels coming in, Tina, coming into Palm Springs, and hopefully our paths will cross. All right.
It'd be
Y'all
wonderful.
look for Eric at the film festival, and yeah, I know it's going to be a success.
Thank you so much, Valerie.
Gratitude.
God bless you.
God bless.
Bye.